Hello, Hare Krishna, and welcome. We're back at the Atma Paradigm, and we're continuing with part 4 of our series entitled The Universe and Beyond. Now, last week we considered non-temporal reality. Why there must be a something beyond the defined boundaries of space as we understand it within this universe, and also before and outside of time, also as we know it within the universe. So today we extend that exploration of what pre-exists or exists outside of the universe and identify another factor that can be inferred as part of that pre-temporal or extra-universal reality. And that factor is consciousness. Hence our title, The Metaphysics of Consciousness and the Universe. And we start as usual with a short recap of where we are. The fact of the energy that exists at the start of the universe and the fact that there seems to be information embedded in the starting conditions seems to suggest that there must be a something beyond the universe, an extra universal source that holds in potential form all of the matter that is going to exist within the manifest cosmos. And the information that can specify all of that encoded within the very inception of our universe. So the material requirements for our universe can be said to be present in potential state within this extra universal something form of reality. And so we present that expanse of somethingness as a sort of plenum, the opposite of a vacuum, because it is full of stuff. It is a realm of potentiality out of which our universe has emerged, and maybe many other universes. And last week we identified two things that this source of potentiality needs in order to provide our universe with what it has. One is material, that is matter in a sort of potential state, and it's whatever it is devoid of any physical manifestation or differentiation, and information, sufficient specifying information that results in the only or most likely outcome of the universe turning out as it is, perfectly tuned and formed in order to accommodate life. Now, these extra universal sources of matter and information are required to explain how the universe becomes activated and how it produces its components, which are the laws of physics, the forces, the matter particles, and how it then utilizes those components to manifest order, structure, and also function. So how do we account for the presence of information in this extra universal reality? Well, being consistent with the principle that we've talked about so much in the Atma Paradigm, the only viable source of specifying information that we know of is consciousness. So what do we mean by consciousness in this context of extra universal reality? That's really where we're going today. And I think various people might pose different answers to this one. Some might feel that it's a ridiculous concept because they believe that consciousness is a product of physical and biological interactions, and therefore it's only possible to have consciousness after the universe has developed sufficiently to house sentient life. Now, we've talked about how we critique that particular view, but I'm not going to take away the right for the individuals to have their freedom for that belief. If they want to indulge in that belief, that is fine. However, we've already thoroughly investigated that proposition, and we found no viable theory or evidence to substantiate the idea that consciousness is a product of physical or biological activity. Indeed, the indications seem to suggest the opposite. Consciousness exhibits unique qualities that so far we have not been able to reduce to physical or neural properties. And so the Atma Paradigm is going to proceed on the basis that consciousness is a fundamental component or property of reality. And hence the possibility for consciousness to exist outside of the realm of time remains open. Now, we're not alone in that thought. There are many whose concept of consciousness transcends time and space. Some of them may wish to invoke a divinity or a creator or an intelligent designer at this point in order to explain complexity and the origins of a successful, fine-tuned universe. And again, I wouldn't wish to deny them such freedom of their beliefs. But here in the Atma Paradigm, we're going to continue with our philosophical investigation because we haven't yet reached the end of what we can infer through reason and logic. Nor have we exhausted what might be confirmed by empirical evidence. So before we fill in the gaps of our knowledge, whether with physicalist or theological or any other type of beliefs, let's ensure that we have reached the furthest point that rational intelligence can take us. So here is the take on the role of pre-temporal or extra-universal consciousness, according to the Atma Paradigm analysis. And of course, as usual, we are drawing on some of the insights of Vedantic philosophy and reasoning. Let's look at the justification for our inference that consciousness is non-temporal. Going back to our earliest talks, we had our what we called pre-philosophical intuitions, meaning that these were premises, axioms that we could take for granted before we kind of philosophize on them and try and devise ideas and logic arising from them. And these pre-philosophical intuitions included, I know I exist at this moment. I know I'm the witness of my experiences. So for each of us, we are the singular, subjective witness of qualitative experiences within our minds and bodies. Now, I suggest if you want more details on that, or that's new for you because you've just come into this particular talk, please go back to part 1 of our series and get more information on that. Now, much literature on consciousness might seek to kind of challenge those statements. But if you remember, when we looked at the arguments against why we do not exist or why we do not kind of should not regard ourselves as unified conscious witnesses of our experiences, we found that those arguments were kind of devised because neuroscience cannot find anything within the brain that would account for those intuitions and those experiences. But that didn't and doesn't make those intuitions invalid. In fact, these intuitions remain the best set of epistemological premises upon which to build a philosophy and science of existence. And we put out the challenge to see if anyone's got any better premises on which to build a philosophy and science of existence. So, and if these axioms do not fit within the physicalist model, well, that model doesn't have any grounding, and we're left with to look for an alternative, to accept that conscious experience is not a physical phenomenon. And that is why throughout this series we have been categorizing consciousness as its own fundamental component of reality. Now, with regard to the issue of non-temporality, another intuition was important. That we are the same witness of our experiences throughout our life. We're not only witnessing things now, but actually we remain the same witness throughout our life. This is something we take for granted, but it really is quite an amazing fact that everything around us is changing, including our own bodies, but we remain the persistent witness of each of those changing moments. Now, give us an idea how this works. It's like the events that we experience are being presented to us like a film reel. And we are aware of, at this moment, of this moment. Or at least we're aware of what is in front of us at this moment. And we accept that we are the witness that just happened and of the one before that. So we have the understanding of ourself as the conscious witness all the way back to our earliest recollection. But as soon as we've reflected on the fact that I am the witness of the current moment, the moment has passed. And the information in front of me, on the presentation in front of me, has changed. But I appreciate that I am still the same unified, the same single witness who is the subject of the action or the scene that is in front of me as part of the new now moment. In this way, I have an expectation of being the same witness of many more moments still to come. Now that might lead us to suggest that the world of physical stuff is affected by change over time. It's temporal, if you like. But consciousness, whilst an observer of the world of physicality, is not affected by temporal change itself. Consciousness is, in effect, a non-temporal phenomenon of reality. Now, an understanding of time is crucial to appreciating how consciousness interacts with the world of matter. And if we just start to think about time for a bit, looking at this diagram, I might ask, does time move in a forward direction, turning the now moment into the future? Or does it move in a backward direction, turning the now moment into the past? Now that's just a little paradox or conundrum to see how easy it is to torment ourselves about thinking, what is time? There's an old story of St. Augustine who reckoned that on his own he felt confident he understood what time was. But as soon as someone asked him, what's time? He realised he didn't know. Now I'm not going to try and sort out all of the various concepts of time that great minds have kind of pondered over millennia. But we will be offering one way of thinking about time that is perhaps a little different from the usual. Now, time is often described as a dimension or a fourth dimension. And in the concept of Einstein's space-time, it is integral together with the mathematical description. So there's a mathematical description of a medium that contains all matter and explains its various movements. So if your purpose is to model how objects are located in space over time, then combining space and time makes sense. Now, other concepts of time arise from physics. For instance, there is the arrow of entropy. That's time as moving systems towards increased disorder. Or there's a kind of arrow of time in cosmology that Hawking talks about, that how the universe is expanding rather than contracting. And many thinkers link time to how we perceive it psychologically, how we perceive the passing of time and how we measure the passing of time or measure the movement of things over a period of time. Newton reckoned that periods of time were absolute. It was the same for everyone, everywhere. But Einstein's special theory of relativity fixes the speed of light, and therefore the movement of an observer will affect how the passing of time is experienced and measured. But I'm going to ask you to just step back from those concepts. Let's not think of measurement of passing time or how time accommodates motion in space. Einstein's famous thought experiment considered what would be the experience of time for someone if they were riding on a ray of light going at that speed. We're going to try a different thought. What would time seem to do from the viewpoint of an observer that does not change over time? Now that's actually the case. You don't change over time. But perhaps many philosophers and scientists have not really analysed time from that particular perspective. So here we have our non-temporal observer sitting in the theatre of his experience. And on the screen, at the moment it's blank, but that's temporal reality. So this idea kind of brings in some of the Vedantic and Vedic traditions, thinking about time as a non-temporal observer, rather than an observer who believes that I am caught up in time and undergoing change within time. So here we have our persistent, i.e. permanent witness, the non-temporal observer, sitting in front of the screen of temporal reality. And time is like the projector, turning the reels of what is shown on the screen. So each frame and I apologize, this is the old-fashioned system, each frame on the film reel is a distinct image. It represents the state of temporal reality at that one moment. And that frame then fades and a new one takes its place. And then a new one. And this seems to represent motion and action. And things are happening. And it's showing causality. And it's affecting the other stuff and making things happen. So the observer may experience all of this as a seamless sequence of events, one thing causing something else to happen. And we may think of this as movement, but actually what we experienced, and there's an important distinction, is we experienced change. Each frame was a unique specification of objects in terms of their location and their other properties like their appearance and their features, orientation and so on. Each frame is its own encoded depiction of reality. It's produced from a set of information that specified every facet of that moment. What object was there, in what orientation, and what appearance, etc. So what we are experiencing is the change in the information state of the objects of a scene from one moment to the next. So in the Atma Paradigm, we're going to define time as the capacity to change the information content belonging to one moment, or at least it is the facility that allows there to be a change of information content from one moment to the next. Time is the feature that gives physical reality its capacity to be changeable. Now, to be clear, time does not itself change things. It does not change the scenes. It doesn't change what the next frame will be. It just ensures that there will be a next frame. So what changes from scene to scene is the information content specifying what that scene will be. Time doesn't determine the information content. Information content is determined by something that we talked about before, guna data. Time's role is to enable the information content to be changed. Now, this is a really important topic, and we're going to explore the metaphysics of how time and matter work in much more detail next week. But for now, the important point that we want to draw from it for today's discussion is that consciousness is the facet of reality that is able to perceive these changes. And we experience and interpret this as the passing of time, for the very reason that consciousness is not itself being changed by the passing of time. So we experience the passing of time because we are not being changed by time. So let's consider this in terms of our model of the different elements that we talked about as our kind of ontological model. You know, the different facets of reality. And we're keeping this very simple. So on one part of our spectrum of reality, we have what we call physical matter. And time affects physical matter to allow transformation to occur. It allows physical matter to undergo a change in information content, specifying the properties of each aspect of the world that we experience with our senses. Therefore, we see the creation of new structures and activities. We see the ability for things to grow and develop. You see that things can persist relatively stable, maybe for some time, but there is at some point inevitable decay. Now, as I mentioned, I'm going to give more details next week. Today we're just noting that the specific forms and activities of physical stuff is temporal. It is changed from moment to moment. Physical stuff is under the sway of time. Now, what about another aspect of reality? The cognitive elements. Well, our mind is also a repository of real things. And when I say real, I mean sensory perceptions, thoughts, emotions, desires, and so on. These are real. We experience them. They're part of reality. They have their own kind of ontological status. And we've compared the mind to a pool in which all these mental things float about, come to the surface and become apparent to our awareness. So there are certainly aspects of change of mental content, just as there is with physical stuff. So in the same way that time facilitates change for physical things, time also facilitates the change for mental content and what is presented to us on the screen of consciousness. So, in that case then, the cognitive elements are also under the sway of time. They are also temporal. Now, we come to consciousness. It remains outside of the purview of time and the changes that time can facilitate in the physical and cognitive stuff. We may believe ourselves to be affected by time. After all, we see our bodies changing and aging. But we are the non-changing witness. As consciousness, as the conscious entity, the Atma, we are the non-changing witness of those changes. And we are aware of the flow of our mental experiences. And of course, we become wrapped up in the narrative of the events going on around us. And we can review long stretches of time, say, going all the way back to your earliest school days until now. And that's quite a story. But we, as the conscious entity, the Atma, have not changed or been diminished throughout that whole narrative. We remain the same unified witness of the experiences that we go through. And it is the fact of being unchanged that has enabled us to experience the lifetime flow of that narrative. And the way that that narrative plays out in concert with our thoughts. And because we are looking at the narrative and we're kind of going through all our different thoughts, and this fools us into thinking that we are responsible for many of the changes and events happening to us. For instance, today, say I feel peckish. I see a packet of biscuits. Nice. I open the packet and I pop a biscuit in my mouth. Then enjoy the taste. Now, my complicity, or at least the complicity of my body and my senses in that storyline and the scenes that have unfolded, makes me think, me the conscious person think, I am part of that world. I have changed myself by time, and I am also changing the world over time. Because at one point I wanted to eat something, I acted, and I fulfilled that desire. Things changed for me and apparently by me. I went from being peckish to being satisfied with my biscuits. Yes, my body was thoroughly involved in all of that, but me as the conscious witness was the same at each moment, unchanged. Consciousness is non-temporal. We are outside of the effect of time. In this sense, the cosmologists who say that time, or at least the effect and experience of what time can do, exists only within the universe of matter, are sort of correct. Outside of and beyond the universe as we know it, beyond this, in this extra universal something, time, i.e. defined as that which facilitates the change of physical and mental characteristics, doesn't operate. So even while consciousness is persistent and active within the medium of matter, within this universe, consciousness retains its non-temporal status. And we had some indications of that in some of our previous sessions. Let's recall some of the other evidence that we discussed that supported this idea of non-temporal consciousness. Our normal experience is of associating ourselves as a conscious being to the life within our physical body. But we learned that the mechanisms of the body, specifically the brain, cannot account for even our everyday conscious experience and perception. But is consciousness limited to existing or acting only within this body? In earlier talks we discussed evidence that indicates the ability of consciousness to function without reliance on the physical systems of the body. And one of those sets of studies were on out-of-body experiences. We talked about them in 1.7, and I won't go into in great detail today. These are phenomena that have been studied in hospitals and under clinical situations by reliable scientists and doctors. Now, what makes out-of-body experiences relevant in the non-temporal context is that 1. The person undergoing the conscious experience feels himself to be the same witness of the out-of-body experience as they are with ordinary events. And they feel that the out-of-body experience happened to them. It was something they experienced as the witness. Number 2, that the person is aware of themselves and their surroundings. And so they are sentient, they're aware, and they can undergo thoughts and emotions as well as feel and express volition. So the full factors of conscious activity. And thirdly, they can perceive verifiable events and objects that wouldn't have been possible from the viewpoint of their body. So the conclusion we draw from that is that the entity undergoing conscious experience can function sentiently, if we can say that, even without reliance on the body, its senses, and the brain. Now, it could be argued that within OBEs there remains a connection or relationship with the physical body. So can consciousness exist in an entirely non-embodied state? Well, in talk number 3.7, we explored the research of what's called cases of the reincarnation type. Again, can't go into all the details today. The talk's there on the channel. But we focused on the research by Ian Stevenson and others at the University of Virginia of over 2,000 cases in which children reported memories of a previous life. And the important points that we draw from these is that the child considered the details of the previous life that they recalled to be their own memories. They identified with the incidents, the places and the persons within those events as having happened to them. They claimed to be the actual witnesses and experiences of those events of a life that occurred elsewhere to ostensibly another person. Now, Stevenson concludes that these memories were not thoughts that were kind of transposed into them by some kind of conspiracy of family or whatever. And he couldn't explain them through any of the other kind of concepts of paranormal activity. These memories were as real to these children as their own current lives. In many ways, they were more so because the children found it difficult to adjust to their new life while retaining a sense of themselves in their previous persona. And the example we gave of Titu Singh, who's shown here, he talked about his life as Suresh living in Agra, which was a different town from where he grew up. He talked about the business he ran and how he was killed, and he talked of his family and his wife Uma and their 2 kids. And in visiting his old shop, he expressed concern and sort of attachment about how things used to be and how they've now been changed. And on meeting his family, this is a 5-year-old kid, he expressed a type of affinity and behaviour to Uma, his previous wife, as would Suresh, which is pretty astonishing. So these reincarnation examples indicate the ability of consciousness to persist from one embodied state to the next. So consciousness must be preserved in the interim, not just as some kind of generalized conscious awareness. Rather, the sense of individuality of being a particular unified conscious self persists across the period between incarnations. And that's consistent with the model that we offered of the Atma as an individual unit of consciousness. So what happens between lives? Well, we don't seem to have many verifiable examples of those experiences. However, Vedanta texts suggest that although we don't seem to remember what happens between lives, that's not evidence of non-existence. And Vedanta suggests it is similar to the situation for consciousness during deep sleep. For according to the Vedanta text, the idea is that we never lose our capacity for awareness, even during deep sleep. But because we are not engaged in any particular awareness through the senses, we're not aware of external objects as we are when we're awake, and we're not even during that period aware of mental objects as we are during dreaming. So therefore, after deep sleep, we have nothing to recall, and hence we feel we have no memory of that period. So, but that doesn't mean we didn't exist or we weren't capable of consciousness during that period. So perhaps that's the situation between embodied incarnations. Now, if all of these threads of evidence indicate that the consciousness of an individual Atma is able to persist from one incarnated life to a later one, where does that lead us? So we've got the remembrances of Titu and thousands of other children, of course, may not be the norm, because those children were often died in kind of traumatic situations. But even though their ability to remember may not be the norm, perhaps the actual process of transmigration from one embodied to the life to the next is the norm. And how often does that happen? Is it just between the two lives? Well, that would seem a little odd if it only happens the one time. Why not multiple times? Maybe there's a whole string of incarnations. Maybe it's a perpetual chain. So many are convinced, even though we don't tend to remember, I think there are many researchers who kind of feel that there is validity in the various types of regression techniques. We haven't chosen to quote any in this particular series, but still there seems to be a picture building here of a repeating chain of transmigration, and that's presumably for all Atmas, because in part 3 we gave evidence of consciousness exhibited by pretty well all life forms. So if consciousness as the Atma is present in all life, it seems logical that the process of continuous existence and embodiment through reincarnation is shared by all Atmas. And we're going to talk more on that next week. Now, this potential continual presence of consciousness in both embodied and non-embodied states may have its signature in a line of evidence we presented previously. And this involves the charts that plot energy, rate, density over time. Now, in this case, time runs along the x-axis horizontally from the start of the universe to the left to now, a period of just under 14 billion years. And the y-axis plots energy, rate, density on a logarithmic scale. So if you remember, this is looking at the amount of information passing through a system. So the bigger the number, the more information. And at the recent end of our chart, we see a sharp increase of information during the period of human society. And on the basis that we regard humans as sentient beings, this increase of information seems connected with the needs and wants of humans and the development of ever more complex technologies over so many millennia. So we attribute that effect of increased information to the role and input of consciousness, shown as that little icon to the top left. Now, according to the standard narrative, before you had human society, you had animals. And it looks like they also contributed to an increase of information content. And why not? Why? Because after all, we've shown that they are sentient creatures, so this effect can also be attributed to consciousness. And before there were animals, there were also plants and sea creatures. And this is also a period of increasing information. Again, we can attribute that to the consciousness present in those life forms. But even before all life is said to have appeared on Earth, the chart shows increasing information from the birth of the solar system through the early years of the Earth. And this may be the sort of signature that we would expect, the sort of effect on the chart, on the level of information that we would expect as the effect of some form of consciousness. But what form would it be? So I suggest that this increase of information should be attributed to consciousness, either from sentience elsewhere in the universe, or as some form of pervasive non-embodied form of what I'm going to call aggregate consciousness, or both. And the same pattern is present as we go back deeper in time, back to the period when galaxies were forming. The increase is a bit lower than we see now, but you have to remember this chart is actually kind of based it's got a big bias towards technology because it looks at energy units per second per gram. So it's going to give much greater credit to the amount of information flowing through a lightweight silicon chip than it does to the mass of a galaxy. But the principle is retained. There seems to be some form of information increase. Perhaps that is the result of some form of consciousness providing input of information into the cosmic system. And how does that work? For now, we just consider the point in earlier talks that physicists are very quick to propose strange new forms of matter and energy like dark energy, dark matter, on the basis of their energy calculations in order to account for missing mass and energy. And they have no actual direct experience or interaction with those things. But why aren't we as attentive to the anomalies of information that equally deserve and require explanation? And in this case, we're not suggesting a new form of stuff that no one has interacted with. We're attributing to the effect to the same old stuff that we know exists, consciousness. It's just maybe in an unfamiliar format, aggregated and non-embodied. But it's only unfamiliar if we have adopted the idea that consciousness arises out of biological form. But if consciousness is not reduced to biological form, if consciousness is its own form of reality, then to suggest that it exists in the non-embodied state is actually entirely reasonable, especially when we see its signature in these sort of charts. So we have reason and evidence to suppose that an aggregated non-embodied state of consciousness exists and that it has the capacity to order matter. These charts indicate that capacity. And if we go back to the beginning of the universe, we have the information content that we have identified just after that point of Big Bang. Information that will be established as significant because of the precise fine-tuning of the parameters and everything that comes after that. And this point is probably the most critical point of information in the whole cosmic process, because the standard model of cosmology says that whatever happens within that first fraction of a second of the universe pretty well determines everything that follows. So this need to account for the information of the starting point is so significant that cosmologists have been willing and comfortable proposing that there is this some form of somethingness, this some form of reality beyond the universe. As something that possesses matter in potential form and also could account for the pre-existence of the information content of the start of the universe. So our proposition is, fine, accept that. But please add, if consciousness can exist and be effective as an aggregated non-embodied state within the universe, it's plausible that it may be the factor, in whole or in part, that specifies the information that the universe needs at the start of the universe. So in our image of extra universal reality, we had included material, the source of matter, and information, the source of information that both feed into this universe. To these two, we must now add the third, consciousness. Consciousness in its state as aggregated and non-embodied. We've built our metaphysical framework on the principle that consciousness is a fundamental component of reality. That means it doesn't require to be produced or created from something else such as matter or mind or energy. It is non-temporal in that time is a feature of reality that affects change, but change in the information content of stuff that requires information content, i.e. matter. Time has no influence directly on the ontological status of consciousness. It doesn't change consciousness from one thing to another. It doesn't vary it. It doesn't create it. It doesn't diminish it. Therefore, it's logical to regard this aggregation of consciousness as non-temporal, and that consciousness is as comfortable persisting beyond the universe as it is existing within it. Now we should take a moment to consider another part of our definition. I've used this word aggregated. We know that currently consciousness is present as individualized units. I am the unified unit of consciousness experiencing life in my body. I am the Atma in my body. And you are the unified unit or the Atma within yours. So we have defined these conscious units as discrete individual Atmas. And this is certainly the case in the embodied state. But you could ask, does that persist when the Atmas are non-embodied? Well, the examples of reincarnation and their memories seem to suggest that it does persist. Tito, for example, considered himself the same conscious unit, although he didn't phrase it like this, the same conscious unit within this body as in his previous life, even though his body and his circumstances were different between the two situations. He felt he was the same person experiencing things, the same Atma, therefore. And many people believe that, but there is a kind of view that many people believe that non-embodied consciousness entails some form of merging or unification. And they may even have been told that that's the conclusion of Vedanta, which I'm afraid I would question. Now, I'll go into this issue in more detail in session 4.7, so 2 sessions from now. For now, I'm just going to conclude that the evidence favours, the evidence that we've seen favours that the Atmas in a non-embodied situation are an aggregation of individualized units. Lots of Atmas together. They are not a merging of consciousness. They're just an aggregation of individual units. And I draw evidence from the examples of Princeton's field reg experiments that showed how group intention can produce agency. So when many Atmas are working together, their group intention produces agency and can affect change in the sort of detection devices which were kind of random event generators based on a kind of quantum system. So individual Atmas do not have to merge together to be effective as a group agent. The people that are grouped within the field reg experiments are not merging, but there is a kind of summation and a coherence of their intention. That's the bit that seems to be combined and producing the single overall effect. But even then, even though there is aggregation and coherence of intention amongst a group of Atmas, it seems that each individualized intent retains its own specific potency. And we'll see another day why that is actually important. But let me show you one of the a field reg result from an experiment which I did a few years back. Now this goes back to 2016 rather, when Wales had qualified for the finals of their first football tournament in decades, the Euros. This was a big deal here in Wales. And they reached the semi-finals where they faced Portugal. So I set up the field reg device to monitor and reflect the emotions of the Welsh supporters live before, during and after the match, a 4-hour period. And here you see the effect and the deflection. The period between the two green lines is the actual period of the match. So you got before, during and after. And this indicates the kind of unified emotions, hopes and dreams of the Welsh supporters for their team. Now, I don't know if you might guess from the trace, Wales lost very disappointingly. So the question could be asked, well, does the field reg actually measure that, or could we be measuring something else? Well, what I did was to set the experiment up 3 days later to measure exactly the same effect, the mood of the Welsh supporters before, during and after the match over a 4-hour period. This was recorded 4 days later. And that was the trace that I came up with. And it's uncannily similar to the previous recording. That's not something you would expect when you run a random event generator. The line could go anywhere. So this correspondence is statistically quite significant. And I offer this as a kind of indication of the proof of principle that field reg is capable of recording group intention, the coherent intention of aggregated units of consciousness. And this is obviously a field of research that I'd like to see fully explored. Anyway, whether one wishes to think of this state of consciousness as aggregated or as merged, the overall metaphysical effect, I think, is the same. So here is the process that we suggest when we apply this concept of aggregated, non-embodied consciousness and intention to the metaphysics of the universe. So for this little section, please don't read too much into the graphics. They're not intended to be kind of cosmographical or geographical. They're just representing the relationships of the concepts. So before we have the universe, we have this aggregated assembly of atmas shown in this particular icon. Now we must be talking about an extreme number. We can't even conceive of the number of atmas. And in each one of these atmas is a source of will and agency, generating intention, which adds up. So our little eye icon, our information icon, is the aggregation of all their individual aspirations for experience and expression. And it is that collective information that activates the potential of this somethingness and forms a kind of seed of the universe, which initiates the unfolding of this new universe that is to appear, and which embeds within it the formative data, the specifying information that will determine and define all its components, its parameters, and everything that occurs. So this will define the subtle template of cosmic structure that results in the formation of the physical features of the universe as we observe it, its stars, planets, and galaxies. And it ensures, this input of intention through information ensures that the unfolding of the universe is not a chance or random occurrence. It's not just random. It doesn't happen that this universe managed to sustain life. No, the precision and fine-tuning have been specified according to the aggregated intentions of all the atmas to be present within it. The universe is structured for and by consciousness. Not in the way the anthropic principle conceives as a sort of backward effect of consciousness which is yet to be created by matter. No, consciousness pre-exists matter. Matter is temporal, consciousness is non-temporal. Consciousness generates information. Information instigates and orders matter to form structure. And the universe is structure which is produced to accommodate the intentions of consciousness. And the principles and processes I've outlined, these aren't in conflict with the standard model. You can incorporate this kind of metaphysical approach directly into the standard narrative. Let me do that for you. Now, we presented this kind of sequence in previous weeks, that we have a beginning of the universe, a state of pure energy, undifferentiated matter with no physical attributes or qualities. Within this state, there are quantum fluctuations, which are then stretched by the process of inflation, and which then form galaxy seeds, which are areas of more or areas of less dense energy. And this allows dark matter to form and clump together, forming a template, a structural template, around which gravity does its business and gathers matter, which then forms the cosmic structure. But that's the kind of narrative. But in the standard model, we noted that when we looked at the information content of all of this, it was rather low, random, low. These are low information, random occurrences. But now, using the metaphysical approach that we have just discussed, we have a source of information present within the pre-temporal energy that precedes the universe. We have information content that may make this process look very different. So let's go back to the beginning. A state of pure energy is high entropy, a highly disordered state. but the required information to reduce that disorder into order is available. So we have embedded information present and accounted for at the start. And this isn't just any old low value information arising from the property of building blocks, which we talked about. No, this is high information arising from the intention of consciousness, encapsulating the intentions of every Atma associated with the universe. Seriously high level information in both quality and quantity. So the universe is not starting exactly just from chaos. It is a combination of non-manifest, high potential material and high quality information. And that's an ideal combination. High potential material and high quality information. That combination is ideal for producing the most dynamic and potentially variegated results of a system. And it follows the principle we've also talked about many times, that nature offers a set of pure potentiality, like the potter's clay, and consciousness applies intentional information to collapse that potential into specific forms. So we have the material cause, the energy, the matter, the clay, and we also have the efficient cause, which is the information that is supplied to specify it, and that turns the clay into pots or vases or sculptures. Now, we know this type of intentional information has the ability to collapse the potential of the quantum state of a system into a particular outcome. So in this case, the red dot of our diagram represents a specific formation arising from the quantum fluctuation. So what we're suggesting is that the quantum fluctuations that occur at this very first second of the universe are not random. Rather, they are specified. And when inflation then starts and stretches them, it stretches those specified quantum fluctuations into specified cosmic sized galaxy seeds. And inflation itself isn't a random process, because remember, the standard model has no theory as to why it starts or why it stops. What is the information that is controlling that? So if it did occur and was crucial in determining the distribution of matter for the fledgling universe, then perhaps it was a specified part of the process, initiated and controlled by the high information content at this time. Hence, inflation stretching space is not random, it's specified. And neither is the distribution then of the physical energy and mass produced by inflating these fluctuations into galaxy seeds. This distribution of physical energy is also specified. And these precisely defined fluctuations therefore act as the base around the clumping of dark matter. And therefore this clumping also is specified. And it is this clumping which produces the structural template. Therefore it is specified. So this kind of structural template, it's a bit like we discussed with embryogenesis when we talked about the development of the baby's body within the womb. In that scenario, we talked about a subtle body, a kind of Sharira Linga that acts as a subtle template form, and the cells of the embryo gravitate to particular areas of that subtle template, and there they differentiate, combine, and produce the overall physical form. So even below the structural template of the dark matter, there is an information template that of the intention of aggregated non-embodied consciousness that defines how that structure of the universe takes place. So we apply the same understanding to the formation of our own body, to the macro scale of cosmic morphology. Now, I just want to be clear, I'm not saying that all the details of the standard model are necessarily accurate or correct. The standard model is developed out of complex mathematics, and it's out of the minds of many, many incredible scientists. But there's still lots of questions to be answered, and lots of scope for further iterations and variation and new concepts and new theories coming in. So I'm not tying our metaphysical process to the specifics of the standard model. What I am saying is that if we do apply the kind of philosophical principle for the need to explain increased information content that gives us a finely tuned universe, that whatever the details of the physics may be, there is an underlying metaphysical process at work, which relies on aggregated consciousness providing intention and a set of specifying information that is embedded within the physical system. So I just use the current idea of the standard model to illustrate that, as an example, it contains several interesting opportunities in which consciousness could interact with the system and impose information. And it also seems that at each stage of the narrative, the ingredients of the universe appear to offer a progression of potential states where the ongoing input of information can collapse that potential state into specific forms of the universe. And I'll just take a moment to look at those steps. In the first moment after the start, the original pure energy is itself a state of potential. And one aspect of that potential inherent is the quantum states of within that what's called the kind of vacuum energy. So these offer potential. Information collapses potential into specification. So it is the input of information arising from aggregated intention that collapse these potential states into things with specified physicality. In this case, it's to do with the pairs of virtual particles and their rising from the fluctuations and how they become real, separated, and how they become stretched by inflation to form galaxy seeds. So this is their situation after inflation. And again, it's another, so after inflation we have another state of potential, a space filled with high temperature plasma, and from that potential state of non-differentiated matter can be specified all the forces and particles that make up the components of physics. And the galaxy seeds ensure that the distribution of this new potential sea of particles is arranged into areas of specified variegated density. And then we have a new specification which itself becomes a new state of potential, an emerging kind of sea of atoms and elements, at this point of 380,000 years after Big Bang, and which then, thanks to the clumping of dark matter, produces the subtle structural template upon which all these elements coalesce, thus producing the overall structure of the universe. So today we focused on the relationship of consciousness and the workings of time, and I plan to discuss more on time and how it interacts with the physical reality next week. Now, the logical conclusion of our analysis is that consciousness is not manipulated or affected by time in the same way that both types of matter, i.e. the type of matter which is the external physical and the internal mental stuff, are. They're affected by time. Consciousness isn't. Consciousness is non-temporal. And this seems to be corroborated by the various strands of empiric studies of the persistence and immutability of consciousness in out-of-body situations and in the evidence from cases of reincarnation. Consciousness is persistent over time, even when unembodied. So we also noted that there is significant information content at all periods of the universe. And this is consistent with the evidence we have for the effect of group intention, that perhaps consciousness does not require to be embodied to be effective as a source of information. And this leads us to ask if there is a pervasive, aggregated intention of conscious units which acts as a pervasive source of information throughout the history of the universe. And we pointed out that aggregation here doesn't require the individual units, the Atmas, to lose their individuality and unity. No, what is being aggregated is the sum of all their intention. So bearing in mind the need to account for the definitive information at the start of the universe, and that is information that has been postulated by many cosmologists as potentially pre-existing the universe, we've suggested that such initiating and starting condition information arises from the non-temporal aggregation of the intentions of all the many Atmas to be associated with a particular universe. And I suggest that this offers the basis of the underlying metaphysical process that equips the universe with a template for order, for structure, and for all its features. And that this ensures that that universe emerges formed and capable of accommodating life and the intentions of consciousness to express its will and to enjoy the experiences of existence within this universe. Now, we also made the point that this metaphysical template doesn't contradict the standard model. In fact, I would suggest it helps to explain it. But it is not, our template, our metaphysics is not reliant on the standard cosmological narrative, nor am I trying to substantiate that narrative. Our point is that the metaphysics we've discussed could and should be incorporated in any analysis and description of cosmogony. You know, any description of the origins and development of our universe. So in our effort to unpack the information content of the cosmos, we've opened some pretty big issues. Non-temporal consciousness, the fact that we don't change over time, that sort of changes everything about how we think of ourselves and the nature of life and of many lives, and about our relationship with all existence, our relationship with the rest of reality. We've got some major topics to consider in our remaining 3 talks. And next week, I want to introduce you to the VR, the virtual reality analogy of cosmic existence. But I'm stressing now, and I'll repeat it next week, this is an analogy. I will not be suggesting that we live in a simulation. But it's just very useful to help us understand the nature of our existence within this universe by using examples drawn from the world of virtual reality. So I think you're going to find this one fascinating. Join us live next week, same time on Thursday. It'll be the 3rd of December. It's 6 p.m. UK time. And as always, we invite you to send questions and comments to info@s-pi.org. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.